All right. Welcome back. We got Finance Girl goes full propagandist, actual justice warrior, and we'll begin right now. If you haven't already, get subscribed, sit back, relax, smash the like button, and here we go.
So I'm concerned that student debt is literally destroying a generation, and I don't know how much longer our society can handle it. I know that sounds super dramatic, but when I hear about people paying off their student loans for years only to end up owing more than they started with, I can't help but think that something is broken here.
Yeah, the people who went out, borrowed far too much for the degree they got or the degree they did not get, and then it boils down to, oh, I couldn't make the 10-year payments for the traditional repayment plan, so you're paid a bit less. But then you didn't really pay a bit less because of the different repayment systems. You probably signed up for some kind of forgiveness one or potential forgiveness one, and then all of a sudden now you've paid for 30 years and you owe more because, well, your interest was more than the payment, so you didn't pay anything. You, in fact, had watched your balance get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And yeah, you 100% screwed yourself by doing that. You didn't pay attention. You didn't do a simple calculation. You didn't ask anyone, hey, is this right? Paying this amount for this all these years going to do anything? Because that doesn't seem right, especially with this interest rate over here. And then someone will be able to tell you, no, that's not right. You got to skip that.
This top number is the amount of loans that I took out to get a bachelor's degree. This number under it is the amount that I owe now.
I have seen so many stories like that on the internet and from people I personally know, and the stats do not paint a great picture either.
So this is Kara Nicole, or maybe Cara Nicole. I'm not exactly sure at this moment in time, but she's a personal finance YouTuber that I discovered rather recently, and I will say for the overwhelming majority of her videos, I actually really like them. I think that Americans are significantly lacking in personal finance education. I've actually made a couple of videos on my channel in the past on this topic, but the fact is, somebody who goes in depth on a bunch of different issues to try to help people get their money to work for them, I think overall is a net positive for the internet.com and a net positive for society. So I'm actually going to recommend that you unironically subscribe to this channel, even though Cara put out a video about a month ago that I couldn't disagree with more if I actually tried, because
yeah, there are people who can give good advice but still have bad opinions sometimes. It's where you get the spectrum of individuals in the political aisle. Excuse me. But yeah, when it comes to personal finance, Americans' brains are fucked. They are not taught a lick of anything. It is absolutely nuts that we're not shown, taught certain things in high school. I actually had a course in high school that was a personal finance class that I took, so I was at least very aware of a lot of things. And back in, I think it was when I was in 6th grade, I had this course thing that I took, a little after school class that was set up to have a mock stock exchange where each student got to go into groups of, it was like 2 or 3 of us in each group that was in the class after school, and we could all, have a certain amount of money to play with in their mock stocks, where they would follow the real life market. They just, it'd be if you were investing in these amounts in these certain companies. And I mean, my group, of course, most of us in the class, we all lost money because it wasn't over that long of a time. And in the short term, almost every investor is going to lose. Long term, most of them can make it, but not as much as just investing in the overall market. So there's a lot to say about both. I mean, to those who bought Tesla early on, you're sitting pretty high, chilling, relaxing. If you owned Nvidia early on, you're chilling. You are living if you did that, especially if you bought a good chunk. But it's to the point where it's like, yeah, there's not many stocks that have a lot more room to grow or have massive growth potential outside of maybe a couple of them for AI related things, if that isn't a bubble, but I think it's in a bubble. I just don't know how big the bubble can get. That's the bigger question. How much more can AI be just injected into life and taken just right into the vein every time? So, yeah, we'll get right back into the
This
video.
particular video topic is on the issue of student loans. And just like that thing that always tends to happen when somebody is an expert or really smart in one area, but then they deviate to a completely different area and their personal politics overwhelm their opinions, this video is full of truisms and ridiculous takes that are just not supported by reality. I mean, again, she makes these like blanket statements that you're just supposed to accept just because it's the premise.
Because higher education
I mean, student loan debt is a big problem in America. I believe that people, if you borrow money, you need to pay it back. The concept of having to pay certain amounts of interest, I believe, but I believe all student loans should be capped, federal and private, should be capped at 3.5% maximum, at the absolute highest percent interest you can charge. And then any of the government forced repayment plans, their minimum percent payback should be at least 5% of your loan, or 5% enough to not make the interest overlap it. Just so even if you only pay a little amount, you are making progress. So, yeah, it's one of those kind of scenarios where it's like, well, interest there, it will have to be there, otherwise, oh, I just have this balance, it'll never get bigger, I can pay whatever I want whenever I need to, it doesn't really matter. Oh, the penalties for not paying? Nah, there's none, those don't exist. It's like everyone would borrow and no one would pay anything back. Interest is the incentive to pay it back, sooner than later.
used to be seen as a public good worth subsidizing during the mid-20th century. It was an investment in the country's future, which makes sense, right? We all benefit when we have an educated society.
Education is better when it was treated as a public good. We all benefit from an educated populace. These are just truisms that you need to accept, and never should you ever question your premises. Never should you actually check those premises, because they might be what's at odds. And this is why the ultimate conclusion of Kara's video, unironically, is her basically advocating for the very same policies that got us into the student debt crisis without even knowing it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports me and helps me pay off my non-existent student loans over
to Duke University for
There we
undergrad,
go.
and this coming school year, their tuition is over $70,000 a year. Once you add room and board in, you are looking at spending over $94,000 a year. Even crazier, in 1950, tuition for schools like Duke cost $500 a year. That's only about $6,700 in today's money.
So
Yep, that's because the government allows you to borrow infinitely, basically. And so the schools are like, hey, just jacking up that price. And then it went higher and higher, and it's like, yeah, that'll happen when you can have infinite borrowing, the infinite debt ability. So it is part blame on the schools for raising their prices, but it's also part blame on the government for allowing the infinite borrowing, basically. I mean, there are people who, I've been seeing videos where their plans are literally to just be in school forever, take the minimum amount of credit hours, hopefully never fail anything ever throughout their entire life, because if they do, that'll screw things up, and then they'll have to pay a lot of student loans back. But it's like, they're just going to stay in school until they're dead. It's like, is that really the plan? Like, I don't see any positive from that. You're going to be extra busy throughout your whole life. You're going to have less time for work, and you're going to have this pile of debt that's going to keep piling up and piling higher and higher and higher and higher all your life. And it's like, if you do manage to do that and you just remain in school forever, like, good for you. You made a massive pile of debt, you infinitely borrowed, and then you left it back on the taxpayers and the government to divvy out what you should have. Because, like I said, there's certain debts that are okay. Student loan debt up to a certain amount is okay, depending on your degree. Going into debt to buy a house with a mortgage is okay. Up to an extent, certain car loans are okay. It's like, there is good things to get. There is good ways to manage it. But Most people don't do it right.
Laura starts by talking about the 1950s and how it used to be you were able to work a summer job in order to pay off your tuition, and she ends up comparing the tuition for Duke University when she attended, which was about $20,000 less than what it is right now, coming in at around $70,000, and that doesn't even factor in room and board, which could run you an extra $20K, thus making the tuition cost for Duke University at around $90,000. Now, of course, Cara ends up doing what we often see people do whenever they talk about how college used to be affordable. They bring up Ronald Reagan and the Republicans.
Because higher education used to be seen as a public good worth subsidizing.
I mean, she is a college student at one of these universities paid for by many liberal Democrats, and they're out here brainwashing the youth. It's crazy how much funding goes into some of these institutions that is from the Democrat Party. It's like, that shouldn't even be illegal. It should just be schools. The schools, if they can't figure out ways to fund themselves, they should get no funding from the government. Like, if they can't fund themselves, I guess they shut down and they suck. Welcome to capitalism.
During the mid-20th century. It was an investment in the country's future, which makes sense, right? We all benefit when we have an educated society. It makes us more competitive, more rich, but that sentiment started changing in the 1970s. And I didn't know this until recently, but that change was largely pushed by Ronald Reagan when he was California's governor. Before him, California's state colleges had been free for more than a century.
Now, first of all, this is funny for a number of reasons. Obviously, if you guys are watching, you could actually see that she's running a TikTok video as B-roll, and even though the volume is turned down, you could actually see in the subtitles in the TikTok video that this person mentions the proletariat. So this is obviously a very left-wing biased source that she is pulling information from, talking about how she just learned this from a very biased source that she decided to accept just without question because it already confirms her priors, and it was really shocking to her that the Republicans ended up attacking in this way. And the way that people talk about this is also hilarious because it's essentially the way that Avatar: The Last Airbender's opening talks about when the Fire Nation attacked. Like, everything was in balance and then the Fire Nation attacked. Now again, this is a perfect example of somebody who does not question their premises.
It's amazing how many people that they hear something and they just go, oh yeah, that sounds right, and they don't Google it or try to find even one simple source behind them to back up the facts. It's like, yeah, that sounds accurate. That seems okay. Like, don't even take actual Justice Warrior here and his stuff for the fact that he says. I will a little, just because I've seen many of his videos in history, and he does tend to be correct about basically everything he's made. There's probably a couple things that I can't think of off the top of my head that's false, or maybe a little not on the 100% correct, but overall, yeah, he's pretty accurate with it. And if you can find your own sources out there that you're like, I can trust this individual, and there's things they have done that, have been proven that, yep, that's true, yep. But if all of a sudden you look it up and it's like, oh yeah, this person lied about this, they lied about that, this thing they said, that was a lie too. And if it's like you can just pull up so many things right away that are false about someone, well, guess they're not a good source. Or if you can pull up something and you find facts and articles that contradict it, maybe they're not a trustworthy source.
They actually end up having a conclusion, and they end up finding information in order to support their route to the conclusion to make it look like they're going forward rather than working their way back. And a perfect example of a premise that you guys should all check for yourselves is that opening of Avatar: The Last Airbender, because we're told the Fire Nation is a bad guy. But the thing is, if you actually watch the series, one of the things that you'll ultimately end up discovering is that in the Water Tribe, the Earth Kingdom, and the Fire Nation, benders and non-benders coexist and play different roles in society. And the Fire Nation had a very advanced industrializing economy that they wanted to spread around the world. However, the air nomads that are portrayed as the ultimate victims, they don't allow non-benders into their society. All of the air nomads are in fact airbenders. And call me crazy, call me a conspiracy theorist, call me somebody who's making a joke about a children's series from 20 plus years ago, but I find it very questionable that we are told by Nickelodeon to believe that the heroes of this story, the ultimate victims of this tale, are a bunch of light-skinned, bald-headed tattoo people that are concerned with racial purity. I mean, these people sound like skinheads to me. Probably the Fire
not
Nation was
wrong.
trying to wipe them out before they attacked them, and I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying is maybe sometimes you got to check your premises before you just operate all out in the world willy-nilly, because you might end up looking dumb.
But Reagan argued that taxpayers shouldn't have to subsidize what he called, quote, intellectual luxuries. That moment marked a huge ideological shift, because instead of seeing higher education as something that we all invest in together, the costs were pushed more and more onto students themselves.
So again, we get some truisms right there. Instead of seeing higher education as something that we all invest in together, the costs were pushed on to students themselves. And again, this is portrayed like a horrible thing. She also said that California public universities were free for like 100 years. And this is one of the things that, again, some context should be added before we just judge the change like it's a terrible, awful, bad thing. Because if you look at a chart of college enrollment, and by the way, Reagan made these changes in and around the 70s, what you'll see is that in 1870, 100 years ago, when California public universities started being free, we had 0.1% of the population acting as college students, as compared to the 7% that we have right now. But just prior to the changes that were made in California, we see a significant jump in college enrollment at around 1965. More on that a little bit later.
I mean, yeah, it's all of a sudden you don't have just a college with free, and then there's not many classes to take, because I mean that was the 1870s till almost 100 years. It was like 80 years, 70 years or something there. That was the difference. And it was like, yeah, for that whole time, college was free, but you didn't really have much choice. Think about America, compare it to Europe, which many European countries have free university. However, they only select a certain amount of people. You can't just get in with a good little letter and good GPA beforehand. It's like you gotta go in and you've got to actually try to do certain things, attempt to get certain ways, get certain grades in the UK, and then you have to prove it to get in, or anywhere in Europe, not just UK. But it's like getting in to their colleges and their universities. Yeah, it might cost you less, might cost you nothing. However, you might not get in. They might not have the class you want to take. And you'll have to live with that. Otherwise, you come to America where you can take a class on just about anything, which that's a whole separate issue. Colleges should only offer classes that have a return on the investment that is you going into debt for the student loans you get to go to the school. Like, there's that only that way.
But it's just
Continue.
important for you guys to understand that what we saw at that time was surging costs of providing these services for free. So what the Reagan governorship decided that they wanted to do is have the people who, by the way, are graduating and going to high-end careers pay a little bit more of those costs, because again, you have the overwhelming majority subsidizing an elite minority in order for them to get higher education and make significantly more than the general population that is covering that education in taxes. So again, none of that context is actually given to you for why these changes were made at the time that they were made. We just get a truism about how we used to see education as an investment that all of us put in, because, we all agreed to that as a society, but now we see it as an individual responsibility, because guess what? The individuals benefit significantly from getting that college education off the backs of the taxpayers. In addition to that, this also implies that education spending, and specifically higher education spending, reduced at the state and local level. But if you look at this chart, one of the things that you will see for yourself is that higher education spending was not cut. This is not a thing that happened. One of the reasons why college is so expensive is because the demand for university has risen significantly, and guess what? Your state and local government and your federal government have been paying up up more and more each and every year in order to cover the increased student population. So the idea that we don't see it as an investment that we all put in anymore is absurd, because we're spending significantly more money on education than we were before.
From there,
Correct.
states across the country followed California's lead, gradually cutting back on funding and making students pick up the tab. And once loans became the main way to pay for college, you can guess what happened next. Tuition kept rising and borrowing exploded. That ideological shift 50 years ago has had enormous ripple effects today.
Now again, she has the story completely backwards. Now earlier on, I said that Ronald Reagan ended up doing this in the 70s. It was actually 1969 when he started implementing what is referred to as education privatization, but in reality, the first student loan program from the federal government was actually instituted by Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965, and this
Democrat.
is the reason why we saw a surge in enrollment. So again, the loans, us subsidizing demand, actually ended up kicking off the increase in students in university, which of course put strain on local governments' budgets, because supply and demand, you're artificially increasing demand, thus leading to the cuts, and again, a shift to making students more responsible. So again, the loans are actually bidding up the cost of university. This, by the way, is known as the Bennett hypothesis, and we will be proving the truth of that a little bit later on throughout the course of this video. So Kara, her premise is exactly backwards, and when you come in with a backwards premise, guess what? Your solution is likely to make the problem worse. And I just want to point out that these are percentages of the US population that are going into university, but the population grew significantly in the United States of America over the period of time that we're looking at. So even though it might seem like you're going from 4% to 7%, remember that 7% is a part of a much larger population today than it would have been if it was 7% back in the 60s or the 70s.
Because when you put people in the position of extreme debt right off the bat, they're forced to make decisions based on money rather than what would actually benefit society more. For example, say
I mean, I would agree with her if it were still like 20 years ago about, the lack of education and being able to find information about loans. But this is 2025, 2020, probably when she was in school, 2019 maybe. She doesn't look that old, so I'm guessing it's not been long since she's been out, or she may still be in. So we're at that point where I'm looking at it and I'm going, honey, you don't even know. If you had gone in and just Googled some things, you could find out some information. We are literally in an age of endless information at your fingertips, on that little screen in your hand. Like, come on. You can look anything up there. You have an AI assistant you can ask now. You can even have an AI just teach you about some of this.
a law student wants to work at a small firm that defends against major polluters, or a business student wants to start a new company that offers a more affordable product to the public, or a biology student wants to work in niche cancer research. But all three of them came out of school with nearly $100,000 of debt. So instead of pursuing those jobs that could have major positive impact, they instead opt for the job that can help them pay off their debt faster. The lawyer works for a big law firm that defends polluters.
Now, Kara starts going into how, all of these people who take out these student loans are forced into areas of the economy because of money rather than industries or areas of the economy that align with her own personal values. And I'm just going to skip over this because it is another example of just personal bias infecting this particular segment. And I want to move on to the part where she starts talking about interest rates. And again, what in her mind,
by the way, his shirt's a fucking banger. Enjoy capitalism.
Is driving the student loan debt crisis.
The punishments only seem to be getting worse with new laws. Even though there have been talks over the years about student loan forgiveness, the reality has become very different with the recent passing of the Big Beautiful Bill.
You mean the passing of certain things to take things specifically related to student loans back to what they were before COVID?
Into law by Republicans. Quick reminder, the Big Beautiful Bill was that massive Republican-led legislation that was passed back in July. It was sold as this beautiful law that was going to boost our country, but what it actually does is strip millions of healthcare and food assistance while giving the ultra-wealthy.
All of those are false Democrat talking points to brainwash half the media. Or half the people with the left-wing sponsored media. It's pretty terrible how many people believe most of this stuff.
A $1 trillion tax break? Not great.
Now, eventually we transition into the big beautiful bill, which of course is Trump trying to cram his whole agenda into one gigantic bill that has a lot of problems with it. And of course, she highlights a bunch of things that...
And yeah, there's things in that bill I disagree with. However, with the majority there, it's like, yeah, we can try to get the law passed later. You know, we can fudge things around, get things perfected in Congress. But that requires Democrats to open up the frickin' government again. I need Dan Clancy to be before Congress testifying so we can get Hassan off Twitch.
Leftists are concerned about, which is, oh my god, the tax cuts for the rich and all these other different various things that again go to show you that this video is less about the economics of student loans rather than Kara's own personal politics. But then she starts getting into the changes that it had on student loans, and she talks about how it's going to phase out federal student loans, which means the interest that was previously covered by the federal government while you're in school will be accumulating through these private loans again while you're in university.
The law eliminates federal subsidized loans for new borrowers. That means from day one of college, your interest is ticking. In the past, the government at least covered interest while you were still in school, but not anymore. Now your balance grows the entire time you are in class. We also now see the requirements to...
I mean, you also could choose to have a part-time job and at least pay part of your payments while you're in school. That's an option. Like, you don't have to always go get loans. You can try to apply for any and all grants and any scholarships and get any dime you can get. If you really are that concerned with loans and you want to go to college, figure out other ways to pay for it.
Qualify for Pell Grants, rising from 12 credit hours a semester to 15. That might sound minor, but for low-income students who often need to balance work and school, that is a deal breaker. It makes it that much harder to access financial aid. On top of that, the bill now caps how much you can borrow from the federal system, and
which is a good thing. I don't know why she thinks this part, she's about to say it's a bad thing, I'm betting it. But that's a good thing. If all of a sudden schools go, hey, they can only borrow that much, so we might as well lower some of the prices and lower tuition costs, you know, squeeze costs and make things cheaper here and there, and all of a sudden, now you're not borrowing as much, you dumb tit.
So where do students turn when they hit those caps? They gotta go to private loans, which unlike federal loans come with sky-high interest rates, no income-based repayment, and almost zero protection.
There shouldn't be an income-based repayment on some of them. You should be on a specific payment that pays more of the loan than the interest you're accruing.
Now here's the thing, that might all sound bad superficially, which again is about as well as Kara looked into. I
knew she was going to say it was bad
on her channel, but in
just
reality,
had to predict it with how she speaks and how she acts.
And again, not having you accumulate interest while you're in university, something that is going to incentivize people to borrow more or less money while they're in university. This is something that is never thought about for these people who are advocating for subsidizing demand, even though, again, it has absolutely devastating consequences on the cost of university. Because for those of you who are unaware, President Obama in 2010 actually nationalized student loans. So most of the loans became under the control of the federal government going forward, and they were subsidized in the way that Kara is advocating for. Now, again, the premise of this is that the federal government would subsidize the loans, the interest rates would be lower, and that would mean that college would be less burdensome for university students than it otherwise would have been if they were dependent on student loans. And it was considered a really big deal because in 2010, college debt in the United States of America, student loan debt, was at about $860 billion. However, what happened in the 15 years since? The college tuition debt problem in the United States of America went up by nearly $1 trillion.
Yeah, and here's another great fun fact from Google. You're welcome. The average cost of college went, it ranged from $34,000 at a private to $10,000 at a lower. But, you go into something like here, And here, I'll continue the video
for
and
the
find what I'm
entire
looking
history
for.
of the country,
Hang on.
college debt got to the point where it was $860 billion. And then in just 15 years, it grew by nearly $1 trillion to $1.7 trillion. And this is because when you offered people lower interest rate loans, that made them more interested in borrowing, that enticed and stimulated that demand. So the universities raised tuition in response to that increased demand. And in fact, this is what I refer to as the Bennett hypothesis. Anytime
Yeah, here we go. Versus the 2008-9 times, it was about 6,500 for 2 years in state, and out and 4-year public, for private 25. Now we're looking at 10,000 for in-state. That almost doubled. We're up about 40%. I would average it to, and we're up about about 30 or about 40% as well for private. It's kind of crazy how much they have gone up. Like average 4-year 6,005 to 10,3 and 25 to 39. Like, yeah, that's just kind of nuts. It has increased far too much, and there's no way to really keep up with it.
you increase the ability for the students to borrow.
But now if there's an amount that's capped and students can only borrow that much from federal, some people aren't going to want to go to private. They're going to be like, well, I can either go here for this amount, or I can't go there, that's too much, I can't afford it, or I'd have to work X amount of hours to not have more loans, and I'd have to work a certain amount and with a certain level of pay, and that can get stressful while you're doing school at the same time. So you'll have people that might decide to choose a cheaper place in-state, just a better university, get a couple of years out of the way at community college first, and then, get a little jump start with a much cheaper path.
Money, university tuition ends up going up as a correspondence to that, to which people like Kara would respond that you need to subsidize it more, thus perpetuating this problem. And what's frustrating about watching Kara in this particular video is that she can perfectly recognize this exact phenomenon when it comes to home ownership and how low interest rates stimulate demand, how loosening standards for borrowers ends up again stimulating demand, and that ultimately led us to a housing crisis. And again, it led us to an additional affordability in terms of housing crisis, because all these different various people are just bidding up the price of the limited inventory that is housing in the United States of America. So she gets that concept in one area, but in this particular area, we have willful blindness. We're supposed to blame Ronald Reagan because we don't see education as a public good we all invest in anymore, when in reality, it would blow out the state budgets if we were to try to subsidize all the students in public university so that they didn't pay a dime in tuition. It's just an insane idea, and all of these different methods of lowering interest rates, suspending interest for a certain period of time while people are working through university, ultimately ends up leading to a situation where, guess what? They're incentivized to borrow significantly more money. And Kara earlier on made the point about how she was too young because she was making goofy videos on the internet.com to understand what was the significance of what she was asked to borrow when she went to university. And look, this is true for a lot of people, but I will just point out that when I was 19 years old, I was fully aware that student loan debt again could not be discharged through bankruptcy. And you guys have heard me tell this story before, but I actually wanted to go to culinary school. My mom took me to tour culinary school, and one of the things that really I found off-putting while I was there is that I was taken to the financial aid office first and foremost to figure out not only how much I could borrow, but how much my mother could borrow. And wouldn't you know it, basically what me and my mom combined could borrow together was the exact cost of the tuition. And this is something that we
imagine that. They take you there, they run your information and numbers, and then tell you it costs the maximum you can get. Now, imagine if you said, no, we may wind up paying cash in the end. We're a bit of a wealthier family. And then they just tell you the total. Like, that you should be able to get an itemized bill of your college expenses and everything there. You should be able to share every single dime, every single penny, where it went, where it was spent, and how. It's like that's exactly how it should go. And it's like if they can't figure out a number to bill you for something, then yeah, that they shouldn't have to bill you for it. But that's not how it works. And the other one I think is hilarious is like, excuse me, everybody who says, oh yeah, the government should be paying for my school, the government needs to do it, they need to do this and this, when all of my entire life growing up in middle, high school, and even in the workforce beyond, I've heard everybody saying the government needs to be less involved in my life. I need them to do less, not involve me so much. I don't care. I don't want to do a ton. I don't want them to have a ton to do with me. It's like, that's exactly how I feel too. I don't think the government needs to be in every step of my life. So if, college was free, then they would probably tell everybody they have to go. Because they'd be like, well, we're paying for it anyway, so you're going to go. And it's like, well, okay, I guess. Because I guarantee you there's some people that are going to be like, classes? No, that ain't going to happen. And then it'll just feel like, forced high school again. Forced high school plus.
We see time and time again with described as for-profit universities that essentially they try to make their costs what people can borrow or what they can get from Pell Grants, or in the case of returning veterans, their exact costs of college benefits. And this has been the source of many a scandal throughout the decades. But in reality, whenever you set up a system where
and if your school wasn't a scandal for being kind of scummy like that, and they got sued and, you got your loans forgiven because your school was a scam, congratulations, you kind of lucked out. Good job.
you're doling out money, people are going to set up ways in order to receive that money. It's called rent-seeking behavior. And again, none of this is acknowledged by Kara. I mean, this reminds me of when Kamala Harris was running for president back in like 2019, 2020, and she ended up doing this video where she talked about how she wants a federal program where if you spend more than 30% of your income on rent, you will get federal subsidies in order to offset the costs. And people were celebrating this. In fact, if you go to the comment section of that video, you will see people saying this is an amazing policy.
No, that just encourages people to spend even more on their housing. Like, sure, it might be great for a state like California where 30% might be the lowest you can find. However, in other states where it's like, oh yeah, I spend 28% of my income on housing. It's like, I only spend 20%. It's like, yeah, that's fantastic. Good job for you. And then it's like, oh yeah, so if I want a bigger house, all I gotta do is find a more expensive place. And then all of a sudden, all cheap places are gone and none of them exist anymore.
But in reality, that would incentivize people to spend more on rent in order to get higher apartments or higher quality apartments.
Which is why, as part of the solution, I've introduced a bill that we named the Rent Relief Act. The Rent Relief
that's a bad idea.
Says that if you spend more than 30% of your...
And why does she still look drunk? In every single clip I see of this woman, why does she look like she's on some kind of bender or she's finishing it off? It's like, how much does this woman spend on alcohol in a year? We need a financial audit of this one.
Your income on rent and utilities, you'll get a portion of that money back. It's that straightforward.
So essentially, you're subsidizing demand in a market where prices are already too high because guess what?
The
issue in housing is supply, not demand. And all of these demand-side subsidies have the same result, and yet people refuse to see this time and time again.
On top of that, the bill now caps how much you can borrow from the federal system.
So Kara right here talks about the cap imposed on student loans, which are lifetime caps. And by the way, on Pell Grants, they want you to go full-time to university. So instead of 12 credits, they want you to go for 15 credits in order to maintain that. And again, these measures are put in place and pitched to us as a bad thing by Kara, but in reality, capping or reducing how much you're subsidizing students, the demand side of the equation, can possibly lead to better results in university tuition. And in fact, a month ago when I decided to make this video, I was going to make this argument in a more theoretical sense, based on, again, if you stop stimulating demand, prices can normalize. But in reality, I don't have to make that argument in the theoretical, because it was recently announced, and to be clear, this is one university as of right now, that Santa Clara Law University, who has tuition going up significantly each and every year, according to this chart, to the point where it was at around $63,000.
Yeah, they just dropped it by $13,000 a year. All of a sudden, anybody who went this year or last year is probably going to be pretty mad about the amount they borrowed. And, in that case, I'd say, hey, if you went in 2023, 2024, 2025, or maybe even to the 2022-23 year, I would say, yeah, you could probably argue that all of those students could get some kind of little discount back, some percentage off their loans to coincide with the year they went. Just because, hey, they kind of got unlucky. That Biden administration really screwed them over for all their free college, and all the loans are going to be forgiven. Ho, ho, ho.
After the implementation of this cap, where students can only borrow $50,000 per year from the new loan program that was created by the Big Beautiful Bill, tuition reduced $13,000 to $50K. That is a $13,000 drop in tuition year over year, based on the fact that what was changed was the cap that you could borrow in order to attend these postgraduate universities or postgraduate programs. And I will just ask for anyone to produce a similar program that subsidizes demand that led to similar results, because we can actually see in the years prior to that, according to this chart, tuition rising significantly at that university before they decided to make the change. Hey guys, editing Sean here, and I want to make something 100% clear, because I know the naysayers will use this as if it contradicts my point, even though it 100% doesn't. But according to the university, they're not actually lowering tuition. They're actually giving a $16,000 scholarship to every single student.
Same thing. How about that? They're just going to say, yeah, we got scholarships for every student to equalize out the prices that we set. Aren't we great people? No, they're still evil. They're still terrible. No. You should be going out and trying to shop and go get the lowest amount of spent at any school. You should be doing all the research on the planet, not just looking for 2 or 3 schools. Like, apply to 10, 20, 50. Apply to as many as you can, like it's a full-time job to apply to college. Like, get as many out there, find all the lowest ones, and then get accepted to as many as you can, and then pick the lowest one to actually go to. Because then you'll be able to save the most money. You'll be able to borrow the least amount, go into the least amount of debt.
To give them a discount on tuition to get it below the $50K loan cap, so they have enough money to pay the $47,000 in new tuition and buy books and whatever you would need with the remaining $3K that you could borrow. So they're claiming, just so you know, that this is not a tuition decrease. This is just them giving you a $16,000 scholarship, thus lowering your tuition, because the scholarship is from the school and it's used on the school tuition. But trust me, they say it is not the same thing as a tuition cut. Wink, wink. Again, people, you need to understand that incentives change behavior. People respond to them in ways that you don't imagine, or in ways that are obviously predictable, like this. And as somebody who not only went to university, by the way, I went to state/city schools here in the city of New York, so low tuition, didn't borrow any money outside of $2,000 in a Perkins loan for my last year. I can tell you that after I left the university, I got a job actually working, designing graduate courses, doing video editing while I was doing that. And guess what? at the end of the year at the university, what they do is they have people go around and ask them what they want the company to order: a new coffee machine, new video equipment, and whatnot. And everything that I was working with, by the way, at that university was like top of the line cinema quality equipment, and yet they were asking if we should order new stuff because they wanted to burn through their budget. Now, I was a student at this time when I started at this job and was having this conversation, and there were announcements about how the city and the state were struggling financially and they were going to raise tuition. But it appears that every single department in that university, while they were simultaneously saying that they were losing money and they had to raise the cost of tuition on all of us, were spending money out the wazoo because they didn't want their budgets cut, because this is what actually happens when you subsidize demand. All these different universities have what is called administrator inflation, and all these different administrative employees are essentially working to extract as much money as humanly possible from the federal spout, from the state spout, at the expense of the student. Again, I went to a very affordable public school, but one of the things that I noticed about that public school was that the number of full-time tenured faculty was on the decline because they were going with adjunct professors. So what was ultimately ended up happening was that you were paying administrators premium salaries while the actual education part of it took a backseat, because again, it was all focused on drawing in as much money as humanly possible. And because it was a public university, it was all focused on spending the top of your budget so you could request more money the very next year.
Personal finance.
Just like the U.S. military. Hey, they looked at someone's motto of the U.S. military and how they spend, and they're like, oh, if every department spends their money, they'll give them more. Because, they used it all up. That must not have been enough. They probably need a little more next year. So here's more. And so the colleges did the same thing. They're like, oh, we're getting government money? Hell yeah. Rubbing their hands together, being as greedy as they can get, going, hey, we got to get more money. We got to pour it here and make better buildings and pay teachers more and get better buildings and charge more and then raise the price again because now we have such a good-looking place, we got to charge a lot for it. Oh, we ran out of budget. We need more money.
Standpoint, this is so frustrating to see. We're not setting people up for success at all. And it's especially frustrating when you think of all the ways that we could be improving the system. Whether it's through capping predatory interest rates and tuition costs, or providing targeted loan forgiveness.
Now look, Kara says that her goal is to explain this to you so you can understand how we got here in terms of the student loan crisis, and I genuinely believe that she believes that she's on the right track. What I suggest to her and
is going to Google, is what I suggest to her, and finding a few other facts.
Other people who buy into these ideas, though, is to check their premises, because in reality, sometimes your baseline assumption starting from point zero is absolutely wrong, and everything you build on top of that shaky foundation is going to fall apart under scrutiny. And that's because, again, you didn't question it. You didn't check your premises. You didn't look into it any further. You didn't see the other side of the argument. And this is why she's advocating for the very same policies, including debt forgiveness, that ultimately got us to this position in the first place. And again, I will just point out that I am not somebody who's 100% against, if there's a debt forgiveness program, you taking advantage of it. In fact, I want you to take advantage of it because I want you to get out of debt. But the thing...
Yeah, especially if you were in a time, 10, 15, 20 years ago, when there wasn't as accessible information. It was there for those who had the devices, but there are still, back then, people who did not have certain devices, certain ways to get online, and search is easy. There were ways they could have, but not everybody thought of them. However, beyond that, it's like to the point of some of those people might have gotten a predatory loan or been given a predatory interest rate where they didn't try to go, find another rate or choose a different thing, figure something else out. Maybe they chose just to chill and goof off during college. They didn't have any job. They didn't have any part-time job working at all. Like, I know people who went through college and they had a full-time job or very close to it while doing school almost full-time as well or full-time as well. And it was like you were running two full-time jobs at once and doing all the homework. And it's like, when did you have time to sleep and friends? Oh, we didn't really have time for much of that. But that's not what that time of your life is for. It's for hunkering down. It's for working hard. It's for learning. It's for getting things done, working your butt off, stacking money, saving. But that's one thing people lack nowadays is the financial knowledge, literacy, and just the what's the word I'm looking for? The habits to continue to save over time. Especially if, guys, if there's anyone in the audience still watching here and you're young, you're in your 20s, start putting money away. Start getting it somewhere where it earns interest or somewhere where it grows on itself, and that compound growth over the course of your lifetime will meet a massive difference in if you start from now versus if you wait 20 years down the road. The amount of growth you'll lose out on. Doing the math, you could miss out on millions.
Thing is, when debt forgiveness was announced under the Biden administration, that $20,000, a lot of people stopped paying off their loans on the hopes that it would go through so that they could take advantage of it. Even though, again, they were getting these checks from Trump and from Biden for stimulus and whatnot, and they could have applied that money to their loans, thus reducing their debt.
Yeah, my older brother and my mom, to finish her loans off from her college days, she had us young. It was appropriate for her to be paying them off a little bit late, but she did. She had 4 kids. She did a good job raising us all. In fact, my oldest brother, he paid almost all his loans off. He was like 60% done, or 75% done, something around there. And yeah, he got basically everything done. Didn't pay a ton of interest because it was delayed, put away, put back on the back burner during COVID, and he just was like, I'm gonna keep stacking and stacking and stacking. And then he paid it all off. He paid that huge amount down. He's paid a lot less interest over time. My mom appreciated it. She didn't just pause her payments and hold off on money. Thankfully, in our family, we didn't have anybody who had any due to COVID job losses. If you did, sorry that happened, and pausing your payments, yeah, maybe that did help you. But you could have still been finding other ways to make money. There was plenty of jobs that were hiring during that time. Service industry was hit pretty hard, and they needed some help at certain places that were more like fast foodie style, not sit down restaurant. But yeah, you could have easily found certain jobs at retail or etc. It's like, yeah, might not be what you wanted to do, but it was something. Get the bread going and get a little cookie in the jar.
Also, I want to point out that once you let the cat out of the bag with debt forgiveness from the federal government, the cancellation of student loan debt, without changing the underlying policies that got us there in the first place, that is also going to incentivize more borrowing. Again, a bigger stimulation of demand, not less, which again will raise the cost of college faster. Because if you're concerned about borrowing, it does factor into the equation that, hey, wait a minute, if this gets so bad at a certain point in time, then maybe I'll get a bailout from the federal government, so you don't actually scrutinize that decision as much as you would without the process.
Exactly. If you think the government is just going to bail you out and pay for your college, why do you care what the number that it costs is? That number could be $100,000, $1 million, and you wouldn't care because you're like, oh, the government's going to pay for it. It doesn't matter to me no more. And then you're just enriching certain schools. Like I said, the school should be able to charge what it can, bring in enough students to pay for its own services and not get a single dollar from taxpayer money.
Aspect of debt forgiveness hanging overhead. And again, I'm not saying that 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds are the smartest people. I understand that there is a lack of knowledge.
They can use Google, come on.
Knowledge in terms of personal finance or any of these things. Me at 19 is very different from a lot of other people at age 19, but I will say it's very important for you guys to understand that unless you're getting a scholarship or unless, again, you are happening to be in a specific major that has a specific program, private universities
I think all college is a scam outside of like doctors, lawyers, and engineers.
Where you go out of state and dorm are likely not for you. Public universities have much better options. I'm a huge fan of nursing degrees, one of the most profitable 2-year degrees, or dental hygienist degrees. Again, consistently among the most profitable 2-year degrees at a public university. This is a path to get yourself out of poverty at low cost. Even community colleges offer this. And if you commute and maybe even work part-time while you're there or stay with family, if that's an option for you, then you can get a high-end career that has a future, by the way, with furtherance of education at a significantly lower cost. My mom is a nurse. She runs into students each and every day that come from community colleges versus private universities that cost 20x more. Guess what? Starting pay still the same. Nobody gives a damn what university you got your nursing degree at, and that is true for 95% of degrees.
Precisely. If it was all about the schools trying to get the students to come choose their college and be better, they would charge less because that's a big incentive for some. If you're capped because of, your parents and your income projections throughout your life, it's like, yeah, they're not going to let you go because you can't get more. You can't have any more. And it's like, well, you're not going to go get a private loan because you're not recommended to do that by very many people at all. You get the federal ones, the federal loans, and that's it. You don't try to get more.
When I was taking time off during my semesters in order to save up enough money for my next semester, I had friends that I grew up with that said I should just get student loans and then rent an apartment in downtown Manhattan. By the way, never lived in Manhattan in my entire life, and have a good time.
Yeah, living in Manhattan just sounds fucking miserable. Too many people.
Because you get the loans, and that's just what people do. And I vividly remember this conversation because I told my friend that I had, again, known since childhood that you can never discharge that student loan through bankruptcy. And this is a guy who went to school for 4 years, never got a degree, never got that high-end career, that is now, I assume, burdened with that debt because he did not heed my warning. Because again, young people do make stupid decisions, but we should not reward those decisions, nor should we encourage them. We should try to educate people as best as possible, so that way if they want to go university, they can do it the cheapest way possible, which...
Yeah, we should be using people like his friend there as an example of what not to do. Don't do these things. Don't take the massive amounts of loans all the time for college and just rack it up and rack it up and rack it up. Because, yeah, there is that chance you don't graduate. You fail something at the tail end. You screw something up, and either you got to wait another year, pay more, and now your degree is disproportionately costing in accordance with the major you're going for. Or you don't get approved for these loans, and now you can't afford to finish your degree because you're capped out. Like, there's certain things in there where you got to look and you got to realize, oh, that guy fucked up. I shouldn't do what he did. This guy did it right. Let's do what he did more often.
Very often is in-state public tuition universities. And by the way, apply for as many scholarships as you can possibly get, because again, for 95%
apply
of
to them
degrees,
like it's your full-time
it doesn't
job.
matter what school you go to. But I also want to point out that being knowledgeable about what's going on in current policy can also help you, because if you guys will remember, we had inflation after COVID during the early years of the Biden administration. And I've told you guys this before, but the wife was in law school at the time that was occurring, and she had previously taken out student loans for an accounting degree, a master's before that, and those loans were under a much lower interest rate structure of about 6%, and the new loans coming in would have been at 9%. And since we knew that, we decided to halt the payments other than the minimum on the old loans and cash flow, because the wife actually got a 60% scholarship to her university.
Oh, there we go.
The rest of the cost of her current tuition, so she didn't have to take on more high interest debt. And now, at this point in time, a year removed from graduation, she was able to pay off the remaining balance of her previous student loan debt, which, by the way, we had reduced to around $20,000 in case that Biden forgiveness actually ended up clearing through the court. Again, but we didn't borrow as a married couple more money at a higher interest rate because we looked at the steps, we looked at the policies.
Wow, imagine that. Being able to look, read, and figure it out and realize, oh, that's a bad
And
thing
we
to
made
do.
the best, most informed financial decisions that we could possibly make. You need to start doing that. And if your parents are not having the knowledge, then you got to tell them. If your cousin or your brother has kids and they're not thinking about this right now, you need to get on them about this. And by the way, consider starting up over at Fidelity or Charles Schwab or any of these financial institutions a college investment account so you can have enough money to cover the costs, again, by just putting in a little bit of money and letting that interest compound over time. I'll link a resource in the description that explains, I believe it's called a 529 account in the description. But yeah, you can actually save and invest money and then take out that money later after interest is compounded and whatnot and use that to pay for your kids' college. Again, these are all the options people need to be informed about so that they can embrace. And what we don't need is people who are personal finance YouTubers and do a good job for the most part, throwing their politics and bringing up TikToks again about the proletariat that are obviously biased, that are giving us the wrong policy prescriptions. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I hope this video was very informative to you guys out there in the audience, but I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the abject nonsense from one of my new, and I like her as a YouTubers. Till next time.
Yeah, she did a great job with the financial things that she said, but as far as, the basis on things, she's completely in the wrong. She needs to do a little more research on that side of things. Anyway, get subscribed to a full actual justice warrior. Here, the finance girl goes full propagandist. That video will be down in the description below. Smash that like button on both videos and have a great day.